Hi, everyone. This is Mike Mallory, the President of Leadership Development and Strategic Foresight for SGR. And I am really glad to welcome you to this very special webinar that we are doing with Jim O'Grady on the topic of fentanyl. And Jim has a long background in law enforcement, over 35 years of experience. He is currently with the Chicago high intensity drug trafficking area. But before that, he served as the chief of police for Harwood Heights in Chicago area. And then before that with the Chicago Police Department and served as a narcotics division commander. Unfortunately for him, he has become an expert on fentanyl. And this is a terrible tragedy that's happening all over our country. And we thought it would be a great opportunity for you to hear about this topic from a leading expert on it, and you would know a little bit more about how to deal with it in your city. So with that, Jim, I want to welcome you. Thank you for taking time to do this webinar. We really appreciate it. And I want to turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Mike. It's an honor to be here today to be able to talk about the subject. It's a very difficult subject that we're facing throughout the nation, and specifically in Illinois, where I'm currently located. Fentanyl is exploded across the country, as most of us know in law enforcement. It's not going anywhere. It's gonna, if anything, it's gonna get worse. The United States, last year in 2022, there was 107,776 deaths reported, overdose deaths. And the vast majority of those were opioid related. And when people say opioids, you might as well just say fentanyl. The days of heroin on the street are almost over. It's almost all fentanyl or fentanyl as an adulterant, sometimes with fentanyl with heroin, and even sometimes fentanyl in cocaine, methamphetamine, and other substances. So we're seeing it across the board. One of the issues that we're trying to explore and to identify is if, for example, with fentanyl is mixed with cocaine, is that unintentional contamination, or is that intentional compounding? Where specifically, are dealers actually mixing it themselves, or is it being contaminated in loads when it comes across the border? Illinois, it's a crisis. We're up this year in 2022 compared to 2021. In 2022, we had 3,154 opioid overdose deaths compared to 3,013 in 2021. So the crisis is getting worse, not better. Of those opioid related deaths, obviously, I think 90% of those have a fentanyl component. There are still overdose deaths involving cocaine, methamphetamine, and other substances, pharmaceuticals. Some people can have an overdose on Oxycontin, oxycodone, whatever prescriptions they're abusing. But the majority of the real problem is fentanyl, without a doubt. I was at a presentation a few weeks ago, and they were asking me, well, why fentanyl? Why is fentanyl hit so hard, and so, why is it so prevalent? And there's one specific reason, and it's money. It comes down to money in the pockets of the cartels. Fentanyl first hit, and I'm speaking generally, specifically about Chicago, because that's where I've been most of my career in the narcotics field. Fentanyl first hit Chicago in 2005, 2006. It came somehow it hit the west side of Chicago. I think we had 110 overdoses in a single day, where people didn't expect it. The dealers didn't know what they had. They put it on the street, and there was a tremendous amount of overdoses in a very short amount of time. It kind of went away for a short time, and now it's been back probably exponentially every year, getting worse than the year before for probably the last 7 to 8 years. Fentanyl used to be made primarily in China, and in some respects in India, and it would be transported, across the ocean to the Mexican cartels, who would then transport it using the traditional transportation means across the border to the United States. The United States government cracked down. They worked with India and China government to reduce the fentanyl production in those countries. And so the cartels started importing massive amounts of the precursors mostly from China, but to a lesser extent, India, into Mexico. And then they created factories in Mexico where they're now producing it themselves and shipping across the border. It's extremely profitable for them to make the fentanyl in Mexico and ship it across the border, as opposed to purchasing heroin from Southeast Asia, the traditional poppy fields in Afghanistan and other countries that, there was it was very expensive. They had to pay the farmers to grow it, to grow the poppies. They had to pay people to extract the opium from the poppies. They had to pay people to then convert the opium into heroin, convert it, and then ship it across the ocean to Mexico to get across the border. So everyone who touched it, they had to get paid. Now, by just buying precursors in bulk, they make a kilo of fentanyl in Mexico for a very small amount of money, and then they ship across the border, and it's all profit. If you were, for example, were able to get a kilo of pure fentanyl in Mexico, which costs you approximately $1,000, depending on who you were and who you're buying it from, you could get a pure kilo of fentanyl for $1,000 in Mexico. If you were able to get that kilo across the border, you could sell it wholesale for about 30 to 40,000, depending on a number of factors, demographics. And then if you were to convert that same kilo into bags for the street, that's $1,000 investment would net you about $5 million in gross profit. After you have to pay for your sellers, your security, bagging it up, all the ancillary costs of being a drug dealer. But you can see where the profit margin it's huge. That's why the cartels are like, why should we pay all this money to get heroin over here? We can make the fentanyl here ourselves, ship it across the border, and it's all profit. We're not sharing it with anyone. Fentanyl is approximately 100 times stronger than morphine and than heroin that's on the street. So for 0.2 milligrams of fentanyl has been considered a fatal dose. So imagine how many bags you can get out of a single kilo of fentanyl. So it's all about the money. That's why the problem exists, and why it's going to continue to exist in the United States and in Illinois, Chicago specifically, because it comes down to the money. We just did a study on all the lab submissions to the Illinois State Crime Lab, and we found that 1%, only 1% of the total submissions now contain heroin. It's 90% fentanyl or fentanyl adulterated, sometimes with heroin or other substances. But it's all fentanyl. Everything's got a fentanyl component. I think we had 2,600 submissions to ISP Crime Lab. Only 32 of those submissions resulted in being tested for heroin only. So yeah, it's very difficult now to get heroin on the street. Even those dealing with substance abuse disorder, users, they don't know what they're buying, but they want fentanyl because it provides them a better high. Another trend we're seeing that's concerning to us is xylazine. They're mixing xylazine, which is on the street they call it tranq, but it's basically a horse tranquilizer, and it's not scheduled. It's not a controlled substance. I believe farmers use it for large farm animals, so it's relatively easy to get. They're breaking into veterinarian stores and offices and stealing it, and they're mixing the xylazine with the fentanyl. The problem with that is if someone has a overdose and the first responders respond, fire department or police, and they hit them with Narcan, they're not coming out of it because Narcan is an opioid. It works on opioids. It does not work on the tranquilizer. So they're not seeing them come out of the over the stupor. They're using the xylazine because it extends the high of the fentanyl. They say high longer. So that's a big crisis. Our naloxone administrations by the Chicago Fire Department, we study those to identify locations where overdoses are taking place. They're down slightly, and someone said, "Oh, that's good. That means there's fewer overdoses." When in actuality, it's just the opposite. Because of the laws and with naloxone, it's easily available to the public. Therefore, there's more naloxone on the street in users' hands. So therefore, when someone has an overdose, instead of calling 911 and having a fire department respond, they handle it themselves. In some cases, some drug users are reluctant to provide naloxone to another drug user that's having an overdose, because once they give them an Narcan, they wake up, they're dope sick, and they're going to want that other person's opioid. So you're seeing sometimes people are actually reluctant to give a friend naloxone because of that reason. Because, well, if they wake up, they're going to be dope sick, they're going to want my dope. So it's a huge crisis here in Illinois, in Chicago, and throughout the country. The number of deaths are unacceptable. Traditionally, Illinois would every year we average, I think, 1,000 deaths on the road with traffic fatalities, 1,000 overdoses, and 1,000 murders. And obviously, the vast majority of those murders take place in Chicago, in Illinois, but it was about 1,000 for the year. In last year, 2022, we had over 3,000 overdose deaths. So it's tripled in the last few years. So fentanyl is it's a crisis. It's not going anywhere. It hits every community, hits every demographic. Any chief of police would tell me that they don't have a fentanyl opioid problem in their area of responsibility is being naive, because fentanyl hits every community, hits every demographic. It's really tragic. I've seen personally people that got addicted to opioids through a car accident, an injury. Doctor prescribes them an opioid, Oxycontin, whatever the case may be, and sooner or later the doctor shuts them off, and now they have an active addict on their hands, and they revert to the street. They go on the street and they start buying opioids off the street, which is inevitably going to be fentanyl. So we're seeing it's hit every area in our city, in our state. It's taken over. We still see some methamphetamine here, not a lot. The days of the one pot hookers are over. We're seeing large shipments from Mexico across the border, but it's in bulk. We're not seeing, especially in Chicago, we don't see a lot of meth. It's never really. They do have a user base in some communities, but overall, it's not big in Chicago. It is a transportation hub. However, methamphetamine does flow into Chicago and then flows out to other locations. So yeah, it's a crisis, and how do you mitigate it? What you can do to solve it, or to mitigate the risk or the harm to your community? Education, dealing with children. Warn children. They go to a party and someone tells them, "Hey, do a line of this stuff." Sometimes they think it's coke, and they end up doing a line, and it ends up being fentanyl. The other issue is that kids are, they go to these parties and someone say, "Hey, take this pill. It's an oxy," and it's actually fentanyl. We see thousands and thousands of pills in our jurisdiction that are counterfeit Oxycontin, oxycodones, oxys that are actually are pure fentanyl. So, and a lot of people overdosing on that in clubs and parties. Kids pop a pill and they have no idea what they're taking, and ends up being fentanyl. We just had a recent investigation. It was very newsworthy. We had a couple of gangbangers, inner city gangbangers, that were able to purchase the parts to build a pill press from overseas. They got the motor, the pill press machine itself, and the dies separately, because if a pill press machine a completed pill press machine has got to be registered with DEA. They were able to circumvent that by buying it in parts, kind of like a ghost gun. They assembled the pill press themselves. They moved it to another location, and they started producing massive quantities of fentanyl, pills containing fentanyl. I think we got several thousands of pills from these guys. And these are just, gang members. They're not cartel affiliated. They're not sophisticated. Just some street guys that had the wherewithal and the knowledge of how to do it, and they had very successful operations selling these pills. So it's everywhere. I wish I could give you some guidance on, or it's going to get better, but I think it's probably going to get worse. More and more people are going to suffer from this. So that's pretty much all I got. I got some more. Xylazine deaths are up because I think in 2020 we had 31 in our jurisdiction. Now we're up to 163 overdose deaths in 2022, where xylazine was a factor. I just did an outlook for our region, what we're gonna be, hopefully, we're seeing in the future, and it's dire. Fentanyl is continues to flood across the border. And the cartels aren't gonna stop it, are gonna stop doing it because they're making way too much money. The profit margin, on selling fentanyl as opposed to selling, heroin is astronomical. And it's gonna, they're gonna continue to seek profits over the cost, to public safety and to people die. And some people are gonna ask me like, well, why would they kill their customers? And they don't care. They don't, they don't look at it like that. They look at it as profit only. And if someone dies, there'll be others to take their place. So it's a very ongoing threat, significant ongoing threat that's only going to probably get worse. Okay, Mike, any questions?
Thank you so much, Jim. I have a couple of questions. If you were able to talk to a city manager who says, okay, I know this is a crisis in my city, I may not know the extent of it, what can that city manager do to assist the police chief or police department in addressing this crisis? Education.
I mean, the supply is going to be there. What you can try to do is reduce the number of, educate kids, high schools. As a chief of police, I would go to the high school, every freshman class, I would address the class saying, you're going to be exposed to things that, as you enter adulthood, you're going to be exposed to things that are dangerous. So somebody's at a party, hands them a pill. A lot of kids take Adderall like it's nothing, because they are a lot of kids in college, and I've got nieces and nephews and my own children that are in college, and they say Adderall is widely available. And we see a lot of counterfeit Adderall pills that actually contain methamphetamine. And these kids are popping what they think is an Adderall, and it's actually almost pure meth. But it's a stimulant. So, they may not know better, but, you're at a part, hey, your back hurts, you got a headache here, pop this oxy, and you do not know what you're taking. Yeah, it could very well be pure fentanyl. So education is critical. Having options for those afflicted with drug use, they can say, hey, I need some help. Narcan widely available, which is in Illinois, almost all police officers have it now. But if someone is an addict, even narcotics, the Chicago Police Narcotics Division, we never targeted addicts. We never targeted users. We targeted those that were profiting off the sale of narcotics and were facilitating violence. So the only time we even dealt with somebody at the user level was to get information about a target we were working on. So there has to be an avenue for those who do have substance abuse disorder to get help. We have a diversion program that's pretty successful. If they're first-time offenders, no violence in their past, instead of getting arrested for possession of a small amount of an opioid, they offer them, okay, instead of getting arrested, will you get help? And it's got to be more than just those words. You have to have the resources in place to. They got to have a bed. They got to get. And sometimes they take treatment rather than getting arrested. A lot of my informants when I was younger, I worked a lot of heroin cases, and a lot of my informants would tell me the only time they were able to get clean is when they got arrested, because they were forced to get clean. And sometimes, quite often, they go back to it. Unfortunately, when someone goes to rehab or is incarcerated and they're forced to be off drugs, be off an opioid, the problem is when let's say they're incarcerated for 90 days or they're in rehab for 90 days. And they get back out, they relapse, and they go back to the same dealer that they've been, they purchased drugs in the past from, and they say, okay, I was doing 5 bags a day, give me 5 bags. But now their tolerance is dramatically lowered, and now they overdose because now their opioid tolerance is diminished. So now they go back to buying what they used before, and they have an overdose. That's very, very common.
So education for kids, providing that, what are some good avenues to provide education for parents? Which we can't necessarily get through the school. What are you guys doing in that regard? Unfortunately,
a lot of parents have the attitude, it's not my kid, would never do that. My kid would tell me if they had a problem. And kids, they're not forthcoming with information to their parents. We have to realize back when we were kids, we didn't tell parents like, yeah, we're going to Johnny's house or we're going to drink a case of beer. Parents sometimes have a view of like, It doesn't happen, not in my community. We live in an affluent community. We live in a nice area. It doesn't happen here. It can happen anywhere. So parents have to be aware, a lot of kids, are prescribed, through their physicians or prescribed medications. So the stigma of taking a pill, is not that big of a deal anymore. A lot of, I know some of my family, my niece and nephews, they all have prescriptions for Adderall from their doctors. And they're in college and they pull an all-nighter and they pop an Adderall. They don't think anything of taking a pill. It's not a big deal for the kids in our generation or this generation. But parents have to be aware and don't be have the mindset that it's not going to happen here, not my community, not my family, because it hits every family. I've had many police officers' families, politicians' families. Robert De Niro's son or grandson, I believe, he just passed away from an opioid overdose. So it can happen to anybody, anywhere. So any parent who thinks that it's not in their kid's school, it's not in their neighborhood, they're naive because it is everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's readily available.
That's it. We have to really teach at both levels, the children, middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, and I think parents, as well as local government employees and elected officials, that we all have to band together to address this issue because it's tearing up our communities. And we really appreciate the work you're doing, appreciate this very informative and helpful webinar. And I just want to say, if you are interested in getting more questions answered by Jim O'Grady, you can reach out to us. We will also include his personal email for you. You can reach out to him, and any way we can help you and so your city equips itself to deal with this issue, SGR certainly wants to be assistance to you. So thanks again, Jim. Really appreciate it. Thank you for all the good work you're doing there in Chicago and in the Illinois area. And we wish you the very best in that effort.
Mike, I could just add one comment. For the police chiefs out there and the city managers in small jurisdictions, you have to have an open mind. You can't assume that's not in your community. If those people that do have a substance abuse disorder, if you give them an outlet to seek help, many of them will. If they think that, if I call the police on my family member, or if I myself seek help, I'm going to get arrested, or you can't have that attitude, because you keep it secretive and people are reluctant to get help. So city managers and police chiefs, they have to be open-minded. You can't be old school, like we arrest drug users. That mentality leads to more overdoses. Your goal as a chief is to lock up, is to arrest and prosecute drug dealers, not drug users.
Yeah, that's a great word, Jim. We so appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you down the road.
Cool. Thanks, Mike.